I will be forever the myth.
You're the king of kings, Arnold.
There's always a pecking order. The little peckers never mess with the big peckers. So I'm a rooster, and he's a chicken, so to speak.
All right, welcome back to the Bodybuilding Legends podcast. And my special guest today is my good friend Peter McGough. And we're going to talk about some old school bodybuilding. Peter, how's it going?
Pretty good, John. Thanks for having me on here. I always enjoy the conversations, going back into the history and sort of establishing how we got to where we are today. It's always, sometimes you learn a thing yourself talking about it,
Yeah, it's always good. It's always good having you on, Peter. I appreciate every time you come on the show. Well, I want to start off maybe talking about, we're going on now I think this is the 55th year of the Mr. Olympia because it started in 1965.
Yeah.
So we've seen the sport change a lot over the years, and you've been involved in the sport since the early 70s. I remember you telling me you used to go to the NAB of Mr. Universe when you were living in England as a young and seeing all those classic competitions. So you got to see some of the great bodybuilders throughout the decades. I just did an interview last week with Walter van der Breyden, who was a judge from the Netherlands.
Oh, yeah, I know Walter.
You know Walter? Yeah, I figured you'd probably.
Yeah.
So Walter started judging competitions in 1977. He went all the way up until 2009. So he really got to see the gamut of how the sport changed. Yeah. So when we look at like all the Mr. Olympia winners from Larry Scott all the way up until Brandon Curry, if you had to look at all those guys, who are some of your favorites and why do you think they would be some of your favorites? Who do you think best represents the Mr. Olympia?
Well, I think, you have to come back to Arnold. I mean, he represented the Mr. Olympia, but also established it in many ways. Although it started in 1965, the NABBA Universe was still the main event up until 1971. I mean, Arnold won the NABBA Universe Pro Universe in 1970, won it 3 times. He would have probably entered in 71 again, but the IFBB brought a ruling out saying you couldn't go into another federation.
Right.
And although the 71 NABBA Universe was a vintage contest with Bill Pearl beating Sergio Oliva and Reg Park, the next year is when the Olympia took over, when Sergio went against Arnold and Franco and Frank Zaidin-Essen. And after that became the main event and the top bodybuilder in the world without a dispute at the time was Arnold. There was a talk about, he never faced off against Bill Pearl. Well, Arnold told me once he was terribly disappointed about that 71 decision. He didn't say he wanted to compete against Bill Pearl. He said, because I wanted to beat Bill Pearl, because he wanted to, show that he was the best around. And so he was a bit disappointed at never having had that matchup. But so back to the original question, I think he epitomizes, his dominance of the whole competition. Certainly the first 6 years that he won it, it was everybody was there for second place, and he established a look that we all still admire today and quote as being maybe, that's how bodybuilders should look. So Arnold would have to take pride of place there,
Yeah, I agree. If you look also, I mean, Larry Scott won it twice and Sergio won it 3 times. And if you look at the number of competitors they faced, I mean, it was usually like no more than 3 competitors. And you're right, like in 72, then it went up to like 5 competitors. So, and then you had guys like Serge Nubret, you had Frank Zane, you had Franco, and you had Sergio. So it really was an all-star lineup that year.
Yeah, it really took off then, And, Larry Scott, I mean, as the first Mr. Olympia, nobody can ever take that accolade away from him. You're the first, and that's the end of it. It's all over.
Yeah.
Of course, he won it twice, and he was quite honest about entering the 3rd time. He said, Sergio came on the scene, and I knew it wasn't going to happen for a 3rd time, which was refreshingly honest, really. Although he tried to come back later in the decade, it didn't work out. But I mean, as being the first, that's a golden moment for sort of the guy who was called the Golden Boy, you know.
Yeah.
Which again was, you know, a bit of marketing from Joe Weider's point of view. You know, Larry had dark hair. He got him to, you know, dye his hair blonde. He came from Idaho, but the inference was he was a California surf guy. You know,
right.
That was all part, you know, selling that image that we all sort of fastened onto in the 70s. You know, it was like, you know, I want to be the guy on the beach with the girl. You know, that was what was being sold. Build a body, get the girl. You know?
Yeah. Dave Draper was like that too, right? He was another California.
Yeah, he's from New Jersey, and you know, New Jersey. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, looking at, I mean, Arnold definitely established a dominance over the competition, but when you look at Arnold's physique, even now today, probably 50 years later after he won the first Mr. Olympia, how do you still consider him one of the best? I mean, I know the sport's obviously grown and we have different standards now, but what do you think of his physique?
Well, I mean, all you can be is the best for your era. You know, you could say if you put Arnold in a lineup today, you know, he wouldn't place that high. You know, you could say that. There were certain Mr. Olympias who came and sort of pushed the sport forward. Sergio was probably the first one. Nobody's ever seen muscle like that, you know, and he created a standard. And then him and Arnold, you know, should have had a longer rivalry, but politics got in the way. Arnold established a certain look and was unbeatable for his era. Then Frank Zane, you know, created a new look, you know, the age of Zane, you know, this aesthetic conditioning that we'd never seen before. You know, Samir Banu in his own way, although he only won one title, you know, really that physique he produced in '83 was really tremendous and sort of moved the sport forward a little bit. Mm-hmm. Lee Haney, his dominance, he moved the sport forward, created a new look. Same with Dorian Yates, who came afterwards, and Ronnie Coleman. So, you know, there's like, I don't know how many guys I picked there, but 5 or 6 who sort of just, I don't want to use the phrase another Mr. Olympia, but they established, you know, a new benchmark for how Mr. Olympia should look. And, you know, here we are today with guys who are, you know, 4 inches, 5 inches smaller than Arnold, but outweigh him by 20, 30, 40 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting when I talked to Walter last week. We were talking about how they used to have 3 distinct rounds with the judging. You know, the symmetry round, that's what they started with. So the guys would come out and do the quarter turns, and they would compare people, you know, call up 3 or 4 guys at a time just to do the comparisons. And then they would go to the muscularity round. And then they would do the posing round, and they would actually judge the posing round. So all 3 of those rounds were distinct, and they all created, you know, the winner. It was all important. And you wonder now how things have changed because the symmetry doesn't seem quite as important. You know, when I've said this before on my podcast, there's a picture of Arnold from, I think it was the 1973 Mr. Olympia, and he's standing, it was after he won the contest, he's standing on stage with his trophy. And I think Joe Weider's standing next to him. And he's just completely relaxed. His arms aren't out or anything. But to me, that guy, you know, that picture epitomizes what Mr. Olympia should look like. He had the muscle mass, he had the shape, he had the aesthetics, he was definitely defined. He just looked like a Greek god. And if you look at Mr. Olympia as the most perfectly developed human being on the planet, to me, that picture of Arnold from 1973 really was it. And I think, you know, we've lost, I think, that aesthetic look where now it's, you know, when you got into Dorian, especially Ronnie, it was just who could be the biggest, most ripped guy on stage.
Yeah, I mean, the symmetry round, as you said, Walter detailed it. When they went, they still sort of had a symmetry comparison, but they then marked it as one score for symmetry and muscularity. So symmetry sort of slid back a bit, you know, and the muscularity was the last one, the last round you saw. So maybe you tend to go with, you know, who looked the best in that round rather than remember, yeah, but that guy had great shape and balance and proportion and flow. That went, you know, you know, in many ways, you you know, people blame Yates for the size explosion, but in many ways, Ronnie was the one that really, you know, I mean, when he came out in 2003, after having had, you know, 2001, a close shave with Jay Cutler, 2002, Levrone pushed him pretty close, and then he came out 287. I mean, it was just oodles and oodles of muscle, you know, that no insult intended, but, you know, it wasn't put together in the sense of let's keep everything in proportion.
Right.
You know, it was like, let's see how much muscle we can put on this 5'11" frame.
Right.
And of course, you know, you couldn't sort of take the title away from him based on anything else but the fact that he just looked ridiculously awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the hard thing when it comes to modern day judging is how do you bring in the symmetry when you got someone like Ronnie at 287? I mean, like you said, you have to give it to him, but it's sort of you're losing the symmetry, you're losing the aesthetic appeal. You have to make it that big, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jay Cutler, you know, nearly beat Ronnie in 2001 with an aesthetic type of physique, symmetry, conditioning. Didn't do it in 2003. And then he took the size, you know, he went after Ronnie on size and eventually beat him in 2006, although Ronnie was slipping back a bit by that time. So, you know, it was interesting to think what would have happened if Jay had won in 2001. You know, it would have probably stayed with that sort of look, and that would have been, you know, the benchmark. The champion's always the one that they zone in on. He's always the one that's called out first. Doesn't matter if he looks like a bag of lard when he turns up, not that that's happened. He'd still be the first one called out into the center as the defending champion.
Yeah. Well, going along those lines, what would happen if Sean Ray would have beat Dorian Yates in '94, and then you had a smaller, more aesthetic guy beating a bigger guy?
Yeah, I mean, once the guy wins the Olympia, I mean, it does mean something. I'm not saying, you know, they say he's got one hand still on the trophy. I don't go along with that, but you become the target, you know. If Sean had won, then, you know, people would have said, okay, how do you beat Sean? Well, certainly to beat Sean in the first case, you have to have supreme conditioning and then worry about the size. You know, you can afford, sorry about this, the bigger guys could afford to drop 10 or 15 pounds and take him on that condition factor, you know.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, there are many, you know, what would have happened if this had happened or that would have happened, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, if my uncle was a woman, it'd be my aunt, you know. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's really amazing then when you look at the way bodybuilding is now, when you look at Frank Zane's career, you know, and how was he able to win? And he's coming after Sergio and after Arnold and after Franco. So it was really amazing that the judges rewarded his physique and they gave it to him 3 times.
Yeah, but he did create that look and he built up to it. You know, he came out in '77 and that real, you know, ripped to shreds look. And of course, his presentation was always awesome, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, what was it, 79 against Mensa. If you looked at them individually, you'd have thought, well, maybe Mensa's going to take this. But when he stood next to it, it was Zane's, you know, because of just the way you look, the balance, the showmanship and everything else.
Yeah.
You know, that all comes into it at that level. You know, Lee Haney was another great one for, you know, he always looked better standing and posing next to somebody than standing on his own. You know, that's when he used to come to life.
Yeah.
You know, lots of instances of bodybuilders, just some bodybuilders that don't come to life and you're waiting for them to explode and it never happens. You know?
Right. You know, it's interesting too, when you look at Frank's career and you look at Lee Haney's win of the Olympia, I was looking back at some old magazine articles. Frank Zane was actually 3 pounds lighter in '78 when he won it the second time. So he realized that in '77, as good as he looked to win it the first time, his reaction to that win was, I could be in better shape. He thought he was better shape in '76 when he took second to Franco. So for '78, he came in like 3 pounds lighter than he did in '77. So I thought that was really interesting. And Lee Haney did the same thing. Lee Haney from 84 to 85 came in like 3 or 4 pounds lighter because he realized his physique needed to be better. So I thought that was an interesting approach. I think nowadays guys would want to be 10 or 15 pounds heavier in a year than they were. They would back down inside to get more of the quality of the physique.
Yeah, I think, once you get to the professional level, or at least it used to be the case that once you got a pro card, you had a damn good physique. Yeah. And after that, it was a matter of refining, tinkering, maybe bringing up a lagging body part. Yeah. I mean, if a guy gets a pro card and he's got a lagging body part, you can bet your life he's not been ignoring that part for the last few years. It's just something just won't happen for him. Like Dennis Wolf, the calf problem. He tried every calf program you could think of, high reps, low reps, twice a week, every day, twice a day, any combination, and those fibers just would not respond. They weren't there. The insertions weren't there. Right. So to get back to, at the real top professional level, there shouldn't be an awful lot of body part improvement. It should be more a case of knitting it all together and bringing in a defined package.
Yeah. Yeah, Lee Haney said after 84, when he won it the first time, he thought his thighs could have been more defined. So that was one of the things. And then he also focused on trying to get his waist even tighter. So I thought that was refreshing reading Frank Zane and Lee Haney's approach to that. Even though they're Mr. Olympia for the first time, they don't want to get bigger. Their idea of getting better was to refine their physique and make it even more perfect.
Yeah, I mean, the first time I met Lee Haney was 1984. He did a guest spot in England, in Swindon. I'd seen him at the 83 Olympia, but not talked to him. And funnily enough, this was always my forte. When a guest star came to England, I used to track him down and get an interview and a photo session, And there were other British magazines that were trying the same thing, but, I was Sherlock Holmes and they were, the local inspector, as it were. Anyway, I tracked Lee Haney down to his hotel room. I thought nothing in those days of knocking on somebody's door who'd never seen me before. He opened the door and suddenly everything went black because he was so big. I had a photographer with me, Jeff Collins. I went in, so we wanted to do a photo shoot, an interview. He was okay with it. We arranged it for later on. And I said to Jeff, but you didn't take a shot. You didn't take a shot. He says, he was so bloody big. I just couldn't take my eyes off him, But we did the photo shoot. That's the first time I met him. And he told me, now this was April 84. And the Olympia was in October, I believe, in New York. Yeah. And he told me he would put at least, his arms would be an inch and a half bigger, which they were,
Wow.
Because that was one of the weak points, He didn't have a tremendous, and his waist would be tighter. And when he walked out in 84, it was over. Because in some ways that was probably harder than he's ever been. He was rock hard, his face was sunk. Yeah. It was a battle for second, there was no doubt. Yeah. He's won this, and he, like most Mr. Olympias, winning does something for you, not just, it does lead you to believe you can still make improvements, but it does something to the confidence level. Mm-hmm. I mean, Ronnie was never renowned for being outgoing and dominant and everything, but once he got the Olympia, his personality came out. He realized what he'd done. He had no inhibitions about, talking about it, and that's not a criticism, by the way. Just something happens when you I'm the best built man in the world. How can that be? I remember the night before the 92 Olympia in Helsinki, being with Dorian Yates. And in every contest he'd gone into, he'd been the underdog, the little British scrapper coming in against the odds. Here he was, seen as the favourite, really, because he was runner-up to Lee Haney the previous year. Lee Haney had retired. And he was in doubt. He said, how can you be the best built? What does it mean to, the first time I've seen him question this type of thing. And then he suddenly says, well, somebody's got to be the best built man in the world. Why not me? And that was the end of that conversation. Right. Yeah. So it does something to a guy when he takes the title, you know.
Yeah, you're right. I could really see that with Ronnie because he was so shocked. He had never made the top 6 before, right? In the Olympia?
No,
Before he won it. Then he goes right from, like, I think 7th year before, 9th, and he got first.
yeah, he went from 9th to 1st.
Yeah.
You know, you never saw Ronnie as a, well, I actually did, but only at that last year. That, do you remember 97 was a bit of a breakthrough for him? There were 7 Grand Prix contests after the Olympia.
Okay.
Levrone won 6 of them. And then Levrone gave Ronnie a couple of shots of vodka. And he won the 7th. He suddenly became vascular.
Right.
And then the following year, there was 3 shows, Night of the Champions, San Francisco, and somewhere else. I can't remember where it was. Ronnie won 2 of them. Kevin won 1. And in the Night of the Champions, I looked at Ronnie, back double biceps, and I thought, because Flex Wheeler was going to be the favourite because Dorian had been sidelined with injury, later announced his retirement.
Yeah.
Flex Wheeler was favourite, and we had in Flex, we were doing a preview of the 4 guys, the 4 main guys. There was Nasser, Flex Wheeler, Levrone, and Sean Ray.
Right.
And at the last minute, I put Ronnie Coleman in, purely on the basis of what I actually wrote in the preview. He's the only guy in the lineup who can take on Flex Wheeler and in a back double biceps and hold his own, or even better, Flex Wheeler. So he suddenly came through in those matter of a year from just being an also-ran, you know, in previous Olympias. You know, when he won the World Championships in 91, nobody was saying, oh, here's a future Mr. Olympia. You know? Nothing at all.
Yeah. Even though if you look at pictures of him back then, he did have the structure, he did have the shape. It just was a matter of getting bigger.
It was there. I remember Chris Horner seeing him for the first time. It was in Poland, the World Championships.
Yeah.
And Chris said, I got to get that guy in the gym and get them biceps. You know, because even then, he had them great big baseball biceps and coconut delts or coconut dynamite. You
got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild. You know what? You just mentioned those Grand Prix that used to follow the Olympia, and that kind of did establish like who the next year's top guy would be. Because I think Cutler did the same thing, right? In 2000, didn't he win the last one? And then the next year, he was like one of the top guys.
Yeah, he sort of he'd been in the Olympia. His debut was, I don't know, 88, I think. Not 88, but
99.
And he didn't finish in the top 12, top 10. And then the next year he was 8th or something. And then bang, he came through on the back of that 2000 show where he seemed to have at last got the formula right. And then came and shredded at the Olympia. You know, the Grand Prix tours were, you know, much more formalized than, there isn't a tour now. What used to happen was there'd be 5 or 6 contests after the Olympia, and weeks, months before, you know, Wayne DeMilly, who ran the tour, would get most of the guys to sign top guys. Mr. Olympia didn't always do it, but from a top 10 in the Olympia, you probably get 7 or 8 guys doing it, so it was high quality.
Right.
And they all flew, they all had the same itinerary, you know, on the same plane. I mean, I went along on 2 or 3 of them, and it was exhausting. So I don't know how the bodybuilders got through it, because, you know, waiting to save money, no condemnation of him. You know, instead of say flying from Madrid direct to London, we'd go from Madrid to Zurich and to London. So it lengthened the day out. It increased the possibility of, you know, missing a flight, being a delay. So there was a lot of, you know, getting up at 3 a.m. to catch a plane at 6.
Oh, man.
You know, it really, it was almost like a badge of honor to get through it. And even though I wasn't a bodybuilder, you know, you bonded with them because we're all doing the same thing. We're all meeting at 3 a.m, you know, absolutely jet lagged, you know, to get somewhere. And there was a sort of a camaraderie and a siege mentality about the whole thing.
Yeah.
You know? But yeah, it was really confined to Europe as well. You know, the normal was England, Germany, Spain, France, Finland used to come into it, Switzerland a couple of times, you know, but there was usually 5 or 6 shows. Sometimes there was more than that. I remember one occasion, I think it was 97 or 98, there was a show on a Thursday night, a Friday night, and a Saturday night, you know, and it was like hopping from country to country, you know, and these guys used to sort of, you know, deliver, you know, they weren't showing up fat, you know. Every now and again somebody would throw the towel in. I remember Ed Cowak, you know, wasn't doing very well, so we got to England and he just about set the hotel on fire because he was having fried eggs in his room on a griddle. fried eggs, you know. And he sort of come to terms with the fact that there's nothing I can do now to turn the clock back, you know.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how those bodybuilders did it. I mean, how do you train at all these different gyms, different countries, and stay on your diet? I mean, I competed once in Greece, and I was gone for like a week, and man, it was tough just to try to eat right, you know, when you're in this foreign country and try to. I was doing the same thing. I was cooking my food in my hotel room. It's almost impossible. It was like, I don't know how these guys did 7 shows. That's crazy.
Well, 94 tour, we ended up, the first weekend I think was Spain, Germany, England, and then the next week, the first one was Italy. We got to Italy something like the Thursday for Saturday show, and it was a holiday weekend. The hotel staff were basically, there was no kitchen available, you know, there was no food available in the hotel. So Carlo Tiani, who was the promoter, who's a hell of a character, he went to the local supermarket and bought a van load of chicken and all sorts of stuff, and he was in the kitchen, you know, doing the meals for them. You know, it was, you know, like wartime or something. And the Italian crowds, you know, they have no God love them, they have no respect for, you know, you'd get to the hall and say Dillett had arrived, they'd all follow Dillett backstage. Suddenly he was in the dressing room surrounded by people. There was no control on them, you know. Carlo tried to get them organised and that, and the only way he found he could get them to, you know, do as he said, he had to punch one of them, laid this guy out, you know. And after that, when Carlo said, "Get out of here," we got through the Italy show. It was in Milan, which is a hell of a city. And then the next leg, the next show was in Lyon in France, but we didn't fly. We got on a 9-hour train journey from Milan to Lyon through the Pyrenees. And it was an old-fashioned train with compartments, you know, it like being on the Agatha Christie show or something.
Right.
You know? So everybody was sectioned off in the compartments. And the guy came along, there was a food trolley, it was the only food trolley, and it was basically sandwiches. Kevin Levrone bought all the sandwiches, you know. So he had the trolley in his compartment, and guys were going in and saying, "Yeah, I'll have a cheese and ham." And he was like a crack dealer in Times Square, you know, doling out because there was no food.
Probably doubling the price.
I don't think the train stopped anywhere either. It went straight through to into Lyon, and then as these things happen, we got off at the wrong station. Then we had to get to the proper Lyon, you know, and it was, you know, everybody was sort of in a goodish humour, you know. There wasn't anybody bitching about, well, was this going on. I remember on that same, was it 91? 91, we had the Swiss Grand Prix, and we got to the hotel, and it was like a boarding house, and the promoter had got rooms assigned, but there was 3 to a room. There was a double bed and a single bed. You know, you can ask bodybuilders to share a double bed. I said to Sonny Schmidt and Milos, well, you two can share. You put a teddy bear in the middle, you know. But funnily enough, Thierry Pastel, who was on the tour, everybody used to wear baggies. You know, that was the age of the baggies and the floppy, whatever it is, and, you know, bean bags, whatever. Thierry used to travel in a pinstripe suit with a white shirt and a dark tie. You look like a financial wizard or something. And he stepped forward because it was French speaking, and he sorted out the rooms, and we all got the rooms we wanted. There was nobody sharing. Terry was a real gentleman.
Hmm.
But they were wild, those tours at the end of it. We should have had T-shirts made. I survived the
Yeah.
Grand Prix tour.
How long did they last, Peter? Was it like a week or 2 weeks?
Usually 2 weekends, the 2 weekends following the Olympia. Very rarely was there less than 5 or 6 shows, Sometimes it spun into a third week, but that was really stretching it then, because, it had to be a weekend. You couldn't hold a show on a Wednesday, although that year they did. As I mentioned before, there was a show on a Thursday,
So if they had 7 shows and they were doing it over 2 weeks, they would do like a Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, something like that?
Yeah. And, like I say, you bonded with them. And,
sure.
There was that occasion in Spain, 94 Olympia, Dorian had that squeak with Sean Ray in the Olympia. He actually had contracted a bug and he wanted to pull out of the Grand Prix. He'd agreed to do the first 3 shows, which was Spain, Germany, England, and then not go the second week. You could do that.
Yeah.
And I got to, I was flying from LA. I got to New York. Wayne DeMillier's there. He said, I got a call from Dorian. He's sick, he can't do the show. And Samaranch is threatening to suspend him if he doesn't actually at least turn up and do a guest spot. So Dorian agreed to go and then make his decision then. So I get to Spain, he arrives a bit later, he calls me up to the room and he says, okay, I can either do the show, take my chances, or do a guest spot, stripped off, what do you think? And I thought, no pressure, Dorian. You're telling me. I mean, if he'd have lost, it would have tarnished his Mr. Olympia credentials,
right, Right.
And he was asking me. And I said, isn't it better to take 10 grand for the first place than just do a guest spot? You're ready. You can do it. Because although he'd had this bug and he dropped some weight, he dropped about 7 or 8 pounds. He was really shredded, Yeah,
it looked better, yeah.
And we went to the hall and I suddenly saw Kevin Levrone and I thought, oh, Kevin looks a lot better than last week because he'd gone the other way. He'd gone up. And I was on the point of thinking, do I say to Dorian, let's not risk this one? And then they both they didn't pose against each other, but one was in one mirror, one was in another. And I was standing back and I could see, no, Dorian's got it. He'll take this. But he was really sick all the way through. He hardly ate anything. He couldn't eat anything.
Wow.
I mean, the next night in Germany, Kevin was sort of behind him by only 2 points going into the evening round. They still did the posing round was scored. Dorian knew it was close. And of course, everybody said his posing was just blasé. He went and he posed his arse off. You never seen anything like it. Showmanship coming out of his ears.
Wow.
And he took that round, and that's probably the closest he ever officially came to losing a contest.
Wow.
And then on the Sunday back in England, he just couldn't wait for that contest to be finished. Straight in the car, home to Birmingham.
Yeah,
it really was in a hell of a state. He was still dropping weight all the way through.
Wow.
So, they had the dramas. And of course, we had the Mohammed Benaziz in 92. He died after the Dutch Grand Prix, severe hydration, dehydration brought on by diuretic use, There were guys getting ill, not to that extent, because the schedule was so tough, to get the meals in correctly and trying to keep in shape, and flights, flying at 30,000 feet, water retention, all sorts of things. It was really a tour de force, but you used to get guys like Levrone and Dillett and Cormier. They used to do it regularly. It was not like they did it once and then said, oh, never again, I'm not going through that again.
Yeah.
They built up gained a lot of guest spots and stuff by seeing local promoters, and increasing the fan base, because this was still relatively new. We didn't have the internet or anything. Videos had only just started to come out. But if you wanted to see a top class bodybuilder, you had to go to a show. Otherwise, you were just left with images in the magazine.
Yeah.
You didn't see the statues move, as I always put it.
Right. Yeah, we always have that discussion about how the old days with the magazines compared to today with social media. And one thing I wanted to ask you about, and we talked about this a little bit before, was when you first came over to work for Weider in California, and you said you went through this magical period of the sport where we had all these great new bodybuilders coming in the early 90s. We had Flex Wheeler, we had Kevin Levrone, Sean Ray was already there, Lee Labrada was already there, you had Paul Dillett coming in, Vince Taylor. So all this great talent, Chris Cormier, and they were all competing. And you were the editor-in-chief at Flex at that time. So that had to really be a really great moment in the sport, huh? A really great period of time in the sport.
Yeah, because Joe had signed most of those guys. I remember the 95 Olympia. I'm going to have to look at this. Of the top 10 guys, Joe, 9 of them were Weider athletes. That was Yates, Levrone, Nasser, Sean Ray, Vince Taylor, Chris Cormier, Mike Francois, Flex Wheeler, Charlie Clermont. Aaron Baker was the only one who wasn't a Weider athlete, and that wasn't deliberate. I don't know why that was so. But for the first 5 years of me being at Weider from 92 to 97, I was basically senior writer. I didn't take over the reins of editor-in-chief until 97.
Okay.
But because most of those guys used to live in Southern California, Venice and Santa Monica, they were always coming in the office, regularly. You want to do an interview with some of them and they'd say, well, I'll come up to the office, killed an afternoon for them. So it was like Central Station for bodybuilders. They were all coming in and leaving and doing interviews, coming in to see Joe. And even the out-of-towners like Porter Cottrell and Levrone and Francois, they never lived in California, but they'd be brought out for photo shoots and stay for 4 or 5 days, and they'd come to the office. We'd go to the photo shoots.
Right.
So looking back, it was like a golden time of everybody just coming in and out of that building, and the building itself was like a monument to bodybuilding with, portraits of full physique portraits, more than life size of all the main bodybuilders, statues, the Sandow. Every magazine that Joe had published, the cover was reproduced on the walls going down the different magazines.
Wow, really? Huh.
It was, you walked in the door and you knew you were at the home of bodybuilding. You couldn't be anywhere else. It always used to give me a buzz when somebody'd come for the first time. And, they'd call up and say, so-and-so was here. I'd go down and meet them and they were like, what the hell is it? It happened as soon as you walked in the door. There's a full-size, bigger size shot of Dorian, Arnold. Then there's a Sandow, Frank Zane, Ricky Wayne, all these artifacts. And then Joe was also interested in the Remington Western statues and stuff. They were dotted all over the place, So it really was a museum feel to it,
Mm-hmm.
And working in the, you got to know the guys, and some would have personal problems and you'd help them out. And, I got along with all of the guys really. It was, it was a golden time, and it's gone now. That office is no longer there.
I know, I was going to say that.
Gold's Gym is no longer the hallowed ground. I used to go down to Gold's Gym every Friday, and basically I would get my gossip column because everybody was in there. Mike Christian, Chris Cormier was in there. Sean Ray used to come up every now and again, although he was more in Orange County. Larry DeMay was in there. Mike Quinn, Gary Stridham, other guys used to train at Worlds like Lee Priest, Rolf Muller, Bob Paris, they would be at Worlds. But, can you imagine that? You walk into the gym on a Friday morning at the right time, and there's 6 guys who were top 10 in the Olympia in different parts of the
Wow.
the gym, you know, and at the time you didn't realize how golden it was, you know. You couldn't do that now, you know. Round up 6 top guys, it take you weeks to get them nailed down now, you know.
Yeah, I did an interview with Phil Williams, who won the Nationals in '85, and he was talking about when he was training at Gold's during the '80s, and he just said, we always thought it would be like this. You know, we never thought it would ever go away. We never thought it would change.
And, you know, like in '88 when the Olympia was in LA, and I went there for 10 days before, and, you know, all these top guys were in there. There was Lee Haney and Gaspari, and, you know, all the out-of-towners were already in, you know. But then you'd see some guy and think, my God, he's got a hell of a physique. I've never seen him before. Who is it? You know, you go up and it was Akam Albrecht, who was an amateur. He hadn't won the World Championships then.
Coming up, yeah.
Yeah, I said, so what's your next contest? This was '88. He said, 1990 World Championships. That's the patience he had to wait till then.
Wow.
You know, Aaron Baker was in the gym, and nobody really knew Aaron Baker then. It was before he really burst through. There was other guys in there. There was a guy in there, I can't remember his name, and I don't know why. He had the biggest arms, quality arms I've ever seen. He didn't have an awful lot more, but he just disappeared from the scene. You know, we were going to do a shoot with him because it's like his arms alone just told you, you know, this guy is. But you know, you know, and I mean, Arnold used to be, he'd be in Worlds. You know, he had his own parking spot.
Yeah.
I mean, now he's sort of seen in goals a lot, but in those, it was, you know, backing up Joe Gold, he would be in Worlds. You know, it was. You were guaranteed to go any time, and you'd pick some story up. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and then like you're saying too, you had all these great new pros coming up at the same time, and all these guys were in the Olympia. And the thing that was so great about the magazines, I know you and I have discussed this before, was you could have the opportunity to do these long interviews with these guys and have, you know, a 4-page article about their personality. And then we got to know them a lot better. And then we weren't exposed to them on social media every day like we are now. So like you said, we had to wait for that contest to get here. And it really let us know the bodybuilders better, right? And you had guys from all different kinds of personalities, Flex, Levrone, they were all different, distinct personality types.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be when a guy would come on the scene, you know, you think about guys coming on the scene. I mean, Yates was runner-up in his first Olympia in 91. The following year, Levrone in his first Olympia was runner-up. Flex Wheeler, 93. You don't get that today. You don't get a guy winning a national title even qualifying for the bloody Olympics.
Right.
You know? But anyway, so like Levrone comes on the scene, burst on the scene, you know. Okay, you do your interview with him, you know, try and suss him out. Now, he was an individual character with quirky ways, amusing ways, and that was the way to paint him. Somebody who, you know, you'd start interviewing him and he'd end up interviewing you. So you brought that into his personality, you built it in. You weren't manufacturing anything, but you were building on his strengths. And because it was in the magazine, and, you know, Kevin would then not be able to go on the internet and say something ridiculous to contradict everything we were doing.
Yeah, right.
You know, that became his persona. You know, Porter Cottrell, this really nice guy. People used to say, is he really that nice? Nobody can be that nice. I said, he's that nice. That is him, you know.
Right.
Nasser with his, you know, well, what is wrong with people? Why are they all staring at me? You know, all these things he used to come out with, you know, and he divorced himself from the main bodybuilders, and, you know, he was one alone. Flex Wheeler, you know, there was a guy, bit temperamental, you know, in those days, totally different guy now. God bless him. And, you know, I remember interviewing him, and I always know he was putting up a front, and he told me 2 or 3 years ago, he says, you used to sit looking at me and I'd tell you something and you wouldn't react. And it was like you were telling me, okay, now tell me what really happened. I'm not buying all the other bullshit, you know.
Right.
And we had a few laughs about it, you know. I mean, Flex was sometimes difficult to work with. And funnily enough, 3 or 4 years after he finished, he came to me and apologised for all the hard times, you know, in terms of not turning up for photo shoots or being late or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, he realised it was, and he was genuine. There was nothing for him to gain. He couldn't get a contract or anything.
Right.
He just came to the realisation. I mean, he is such a, you know, a change in his personality from, I think he was shy, introvert in a way, and so he had to act as if he was an extrovert, and it didn't come naturally to him.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, I agree.
And now he's sort of secure in his own being now, you know. It's funny how these guys all develop, you know, and you're talking about, you know, like Lee Haney just celebrated his 60th birthday, you know, and you remember him as a 23-year-old, you know, Gaspari. You know, the first time I met him, he admits it. He says, "I was just a punk," you know.
Yeah.
He was a cocky New Georgian, you know. He was, the first time I met him I'd seen him in the Olympia, '85. He did a tour of England after the Olympia. He was third in the Olympia. That was his first Olympia. He was third. Beckles was second. Haney was first.
Right.
Did a tour of England, and again I did my thing. I need to get him, you know, do a photo shoot, but he was not doing photo shoots, not doing interviews. Then he wanted to lift to this seminar place, so me and the photographer Jeff Collins gave him a lift. Jeff Collins is driving with Gaspari in the front, and Jeff starts talking to him, you know, and so, you know, how do you get into this body? What sort of turns you on? And he's talking away, and he said, you know, one inspiration was some guy, I can't remember his name now. He was like 400 pounds, and he got down to 200 pounds to win the universe. I can't remember his. And I said, Bruce Randall, you know.
Oh.
And he looked around as like, oh, and this has happened before. If you drop something in early to somebody, they realise, oh, he knows a little bit.
Right.
And he looked at me like, you're not as dumb as you look. And then he changed his mind, and we did the photo shoot and the interview, because it wasn't just somebody who, you know, some freelancer from nowhere who was trying to get a story, you know.
Yeah.
You know,
That's funny. I did an interview with Gaspari a couple of years ago, and he told the same story, and he called him Tony Randall.
Yeah, he had a hell of a season. Jack Klugman beat him in the abs and thighs. I mean, I think back, you know, and it's like, I keep using the phrase, funny enough, I've interviewed every Mr. Olympia apart from Sean Roden, you know, and I never got the chance to do that, you know, given the timing and everything, you know.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's a story with all of them, you know. Larry Scott, I interviewed him 95 about his Olympia experiences, and then now and again we do like a round robin thing, you know, ask so-and-so 5 bodybuilders about this aspect, you know.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm not sure we built up a relationship. I wasn't even sure that he knew who I was. But at the 2011 Masters in Florida, were you there?
No, I missed that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, he was given a Lifetime Achievement Award, and the night before we had a press conference, and they announced that Larry would get the Lifetime Achievement Award, and asked him to say a few words. Now, this is one of the biggest shocks I've ever had. He stood up. He says, before I start, I'd like to give thanks to a guy who's done so much for bodybuilding. And he looked across at me, and I thought, he's not talking about me because he doesn't know me, you know. He says, there's an English guy who came here and really, you know, did great things, wrote great things, and I'd just like to walk across and shake his hand. And he did that. He shook my hand, and I was speechless.
Wow.
And some guy said to me afterwards, but you never responded, you know, apart from that. I says, I couldn't. I was too emotional. Larry Scott comes up to you and tells you know, is this a dream? He used to come into the office maybe twice a year, even though he lived in Utah, because he used to advertise in the magazine. So he'd come in with new artwork or whatever. So he'd say hello, but I never realised he even knew who I was, you know. But that was one of the, looking back, you know, certainly one of the most surprising moments, one of the most, you know, grateful moments that somebody, I mean, he's a legend, you know.
Yeah.
Obviously, first Mr. Olympia. You know?
Larry just seemed like just such a genuinely nice guy. Even when I remember when I was a kid and I used to read Muscle Builder, and he had the Ask Larry column in the back, and you could just tell by the way he answered a question. He was like, he seemed like really concerned and wanted to help everybody that wrote a question to him. He just seemed like such a nice person.
I remember the first time Sean Perrine, you know, the late Sean Perrine, introduced himself to Larry. It was Olympia Expo, and he contacted Larry because Sean was put in charge of collecting all the Mr. Olympias that were at that contest and get them on stage. Okay. It wasn't the big one when everybody was there. This was a few of them missing.
Right.
And he says, I always remember because I was there with Sean. And Larry says, and your name is? And Sean said, Sean Perrine. And Larry said, what's a lovely name. it was, I don't know why he said it, but, you know, that was, you know, it sort of stuck in my memory that he had that, you know.
It's a shame that the younger people today don't remember the impact Larry had, because I interviewed Roy Callender, and Roy won the 79 Canada Cup or something like Diamond Cup, and that was the last time he made his comeback in.
Yeah.
When he was talking about that, he said Larry was in the show, and I said, oh, I forgot about that. And Roy said, I didn't forget about it. He said, that was like one of the greatest moments of my life. And he goes, I went up to him backstage, and I told him what an honor it was to be on stage with him, because Roy remembered what the impact Larry made back in the 60s, you know?
Yeah, it's funny when I got into looking at magazines in the 60s, this was even before Arnold and all those guys came in. You know, the real stars were Larry Scott, Reg Park, Dave Draper, Freddie Ortiz, you know, and I don't know why it is, I can't explain it, but because I was part of the sport when the other guys started to come through, I had no inhibitions about talking to Franco or Zane or, you know, but I was always in awe of Larry and Dave Draper and Reg Park. I never met Freddie Ortiz. I met the other three. And I remember Dave Draper came into the office, and then somebody came down to my office and said, Dave's outside, you know, I'd like to see you. And I thought, Dave Draper. I did tell his wife, Laurie, I don't know why it is Reg Park, Dave, you know, Larry. There was still these images, these long ago images in the magazine like gods, you know, whereas the other guys, I've seen them come through. So they didn't suddenly hit me as, wow, what's that? You know, the first time you saw Scott, he was complete, you know.
Yeah. They must be the ones we grow up idolizing when we're kids, and we never lose that idolization, right?
Yeah. It was, and, you know, Larry had that personality that carried everything off, you know. A very straightforward, down-to-earth guy. I mean, most of them were. There's very, you know, I mean, I'm often asked, who are the biggest arseholes you've ever met in bodybuilding? And I have to think, you know, I mean, other people have got their own views, but, you know, there's not many of them that have been, you know, you'd quantify that way. And the next question now is, who are they?
Well, when you said that, I remember, like I said, I was reading Larry's column in the back of Muscle Builder, and Vince Gironda used to always have a column. I think it was in Muscle Mag, and he would just rip people apart. What kind of stupid question is that? You know, what kind of idiot are you to ask that? You know, this guy, you could tell his personality right away.
Well, Mike Menster was like that in his writing, wasn't he? You know,
yeah, he was.
If you don't believe this, then you are an imbecile.
Right.
And the thing was, when you spoke to him, he wasn't as hectoring as that. You know, he was more open-minded. But with him, it was like, I've said it now, you've got to go along with it. There's no argument. You know? Yeah. And of course, he had that sort of very Corinthian type of voice, you know, it was theatrical. He wasn't put on, but he had a very distinctive, sharp way of talking, you know.
Right.
Probably not a very good impersonation, but It was something like that, you know. And he had a vast vocabulary, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
Give you tremendous phrasing.
Were you in the audience at that 80 Olympia? Were you involved in it then?
No, I wasn't. I was following bodybuilding, but I wasn't reporting on it then. No.
Yeah.
No.
I can't believe we're coming up on 40 years since that contest.
I know. I mean, just to give you an indication of the time, I mean, we're waiting for the Olympia results.
Yeah.
And the magazines didn't come out till, you know, 6 or 8 weeks later. I'm going down the local news agent, well, not the local. There was a news agent in Nottingham, England, who did the bodybuilding magazines. So you duck your head in there. Mm-hmm. It was near the gym. See if the latest Muscle Builder Power was in it. It hadn't yet become Muscle Fitness.
Right.
And there's the latest issue on the shelf, and it's got a montage of Arnold. And I'm thinking, what the hell is the Olympia? What's the Arnold doing? It took me some, you know, I had to open it. Arnold won the Olympia. We didn't even know he was entering it. You know?
Yeah.
But that's how. Can you imagine that today?
No.
You know, it's things move so fast. I always think, you know, Big Ramy, he came through in 2013 at the Night of the Champions. He walked out, everybody went nuts, bananas. Never seen anybody that big, you know. It was a sensation. It was all over the internet. By Wednesday, it was a dead story.
Yeah.
If it had been back in the old days, people might have heard something wonderful happened, and they'd have to wait for the magazine another 6 or 8 weeks. But 6 to 8 weeks after that, it was a done deal. And of course, people think, well, we've seen him, we know what he's all about. He would have been presented in the magazine, you know, built on his personality. You would have got to know him a little bit better than just a fusillade of shots. So, you know, those days, you know, seem to have gone. I mean, you know, criticism of, you know, the younger generation in general, you know, bodybuilding, non-bodybuilding tend to want short, sharp reads on the internet. You know, give them a 3,000 word story and maybe, you know, they run out of stamina, or the writing is crap and it's not very interesting.
Right. Yeah, I remember in that 1980 Olympia, I was in the gym and some guy comes in and he goes, "Did you hear what happened?" And we go, "What?" He goes, "Arnold won the Olympia. He came back." And we're like, "Really?" And he's like, "He blew him away. It wasn't even close." So we were all excited. And then it took, like you said, it took 8 weeks for it to come out in Muscle and Fitness. And it was only like a half-page story, and there was like little pictures of everybody. And then I think the little article said that it was kind of controversial. And then we had to wait another month. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it was like we were talking about it all year because then the story was slowly unfolding. You know, these articles like Jack Neary and Rick Wayne and whoever else wrote about it. And it was such a different time. Like, you're right now. Like, now, you not only get the results right away, you see the show live, and then it's over by Monday. By Monday, it's like, well, who's going to win next year? It's like,
and you think you know you follow the play-by-plays, and you know, which are well done for the most part, and then the after interviews. You don't learn a lot with interviewing a guy when he's just won. He can't even take it in. The time to do it is the next morning and then do an article on him. But that's gone now. So you tend to think, oh, that's how so-and-so responded to winning this contest. I know the whole story now. Well, there's like, I mean, my job was to, as a writer, I used to try and take the fans into places that they couldn't get to. You know, I wouldn't discuss who had the best back double biceps. They could make their own mind up based on the photographs. But who was in a bad mood? Who was in a good mood? Who was joking? Who was doing this? Who was being sick? You know, who was, you know, the whole thing, and build a story, a narrative. You know, not just a succession of, you know, paragraphs, but get a theme running through it and knit it into a, you know, a flowing story with a beginning, middle, and an end. You know, I think if today, see what used to happen, this was even pre-top laptops and everything. So Saturday night, the Olympia would take place. you dash around getting some interviews afterwards with guys, you know, you'd hold him there, I'm coming, you know, you had to get organised because they were all trying to rush off, especially if they didn't do very well. So you'd end up with all your notes from the day, the pre-judging, all the quotes afterwards. There was no internet, so at least you go out and have a meal after it was all over. You get on the plane Sunday, you try and do something handwritten. Then what I used to do is I'd stay at home Monday, I'd write the whole report, stay up usually Monday night, go in Tuesday morning, give them the report, and then they would start work on it. The photographs would probably arrive late Tuesday or Wednesday, and it was filmed, there was no digital. Right. So I had to write a report totally based on what I saw and remembered. Later on, you could have a look at the digital. Oh, well, maybe biceps weren't that good, you know. But you were committed to write it that way, and that's how it all used to come together. You know, it would take days and days to do it. But I still wonder if somebody, say the next Olympia or even the last Olympia or every Olympia, if somebody said, we'd like to come out with a report, you know, on the Wednesday, the real story behind the Olympia, and do it in that way. Because I'd do the main report, then there'd be 2 or 3 other guys who'd be following, or get Labrada's take on this, get so-and-so, they do a sidebar, you know, on what. Yeah. And if something happened, you get the whole Olympia package, you know, the whole story from start to finish in one stop, you know. I just wonder whether people, I'm sure some people would still have the stamina to go through that on a Wednesday and find out they'd learned an awful lot of things that they didn't learn on the Saturday, Sunday, and Monday.
Right. Yeah. Well, you were there at a time when you were really like a newspaper reporter. You were like an investigative reporter, right?
Yeah. Funnily enough, nowhere was that better exemplified than when Sally McNeil murdered Ray McNeil, her husband, in 1995. It was St. Valentine's Day. So I got into the office, I think it was a Tuesday, suddenly heard about, because things didn't spread then. I think Steve Vennerstrom told me, because he was in San Diego where they were, you know, Oceanside. And Julian Schmidt sat behind me. John Little sat somewhere else. I said, I need your phones. You two are going to have to find somewhere else to work, because I got a direct line through to the DA, because he wants a lot of information on Ray. I gave him his bio and his move, you know. The local paper, I got onto them. I gave them photographs so they could show Ray. They gave me information. And I came out with a scoop of actually what went on. And of course, it was still 6 weeks before anybody read it, you know, and I was really on the job, you know, felt like, you know, was it Jimmy Olsen, you know, cub reporter. You know. Fast forward to 2005, leaving home on Friday, it was the Craig Titus and Kelly Ryan case. They were on the lam then. I'd connected with the district attorney. He phoned me like I was just about ready to leave work from Vegas, you know. He phoned me from Vegas and said, we're about to pick him up in Boston. We've tracked him down to a hairstylist or something like that. And she got him. So he tipped me off and I went, oh my God, it's 6:30 on a Friday. And now I've got, you know, the cub reporter had disappeared. Now it was like, do I really have to go through all that? Right. Obviously we did it. Because then it was no sort of, well, this can wait till Monday. I had to be out there that night because we had the exclusive, could tip everybody off what was happening, you know.
Right.
So, I sort of, you know, the gossip column I did, Hard Times, I used to pour everything into it, you know. Very competitive, you know, in terms of having not just get the scoop, but put in a spin on it and adding some humor to it and connecting it with something else. Mm-hmm. You know, I used to collect all this information over the month, and then like 2 or 3 days before the deadline, I would go home with all this information and put the column together. No, that's not worthy. This needs to be added, you know. And I used to pick all the photographs and everything, so it was like a little newspaper, you know, of its own. It was like a mini pumping press, which is the tabloid we used to do, because we used to have headlines on the first page of the gossip column. What Samir said next, so and so in fist fight, you know, whatever, you know,
right.
showing Bruno as you've never seen him before, whatever, you know.
Right.
It was like the headlines, you know.
Yeah. All right, Peter. Well, yeah, I want to thank you again for joining us on the show. It's always great talking old school bodybuilding with you. I always learn something new every time you're on. And
well, that's because I always make it up. I mean, even I haven't heard some of the stories I've said tonight, but never mind.
I hope you're doing good, and say hi to your wife Ann for me. And the next time you guys are in Tampa, I definitely want to see you so I can take you out to dinner. So
Okay.
promise me the next time you're here, you'll tell me.
I'll be up this afternoon. Yeah. Okay, John, thanks again. It's always a pleasure to reminisce about, you know, what we've both committed ourselves to.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Peter, thank you very much. And
thanks a lot.
Take care of yourself, and we'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 by John Hansen is the book that celebrates the golden age of bodybuilding. This was the era in which legends such as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sergio Oliva, Frank Zane, Robbie Robinson, Cal Scalak, and Mike Menser battled it out on stage for the biggest titles in bodybuilding. Read about some of the most exciting competitions that took place in the 1970s, including the Oliva-Schwarzenegger battles, Zane's first Olympia victory, and Scalak's controversial Mr. Olympia appearance, and much more. Filled with inspiring images of some of the greatest bodybuilders in the history of the sport, Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 is now available on Amazon.com, or email John directly at naturalolympia@gmail.com.